Hey everyone, welcome back. You know how sometimes there are these buzzwords floating around and you hear them everywhere you turn?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, one that's been impossible to ignore in the software world lately is test automation. So we figured it was high time for a deep dive to sort through it all. We've gathered some super interesting material here, and basically, we want to come away with a solid understanding of a few key things.
Exactly.
Like, what exactly is test automation? Why are people making such a big deal about it? What are some of the challenges you might run into?
All the practical stuff.
Yeah, and maybe even take a peek at some of the tools that are out there making it all happen.
Sounds good to me.
So should we jump right in?
Let's do it.
All right, so first things first. When we talk about test automation, what are we actually talking about? Can you break it down?
Well, imagine you had this incredibly precise robot, right?
Hmm.
And it just never gets tired.
Okay, I like where this is going.
And its only job is to run through every single step of how you use a piece of software.
Checking to make sure everything is working like it's supposed to.
Exactly. So instead of having actual humans sitting there clicking buttons, typing things in, and checking results,
Which, let's be honest, can get pretty tedious.
we use this special software to do all those tests for us. And the cool part is, it automatically compares the results to what we expect to happen.
Ah, so it's all about taking that human element out of those really repetitive tasks.
You got it. The main goals are all about making things more efficient, getting more accurate results, and of course, speeding up that whole testing process. I mean, think about it. With a big application, with tons of features,
Oh yeah, thousands.
it would be a nightmare to test everything manually every time you make even a small change.
Yeah, you'd probably miss a ton of bugs too. So how do these software robots, how do they actually do the testing?
It's all about scripts.
Scripts.
Yeah. Think of them like sets of instructions that tell the automation software how to interact with the application.
So like a step-by-step guide.
Exactly. They simulate what a user would do, clicking buttons, filling out forms, navigating menus, you name it.
Basically anything a human can do.
Exactly. And the beauty is once you create these scripts, you can run them automatically. And here's the kicker. You can run them again and again super fast, especially after you make any tweaks to the software. And that quick feedback is so valuable for catching bugs early on.
Makes sense. So if I'm hearing you right, the biggest difference between a human tester and these automated scripts is consistency.
Bingo. You see, humans, we're prone to making little mistakes.
We're only human. Right.
Like, you might click the wrong thing accidentally, or skip a step without realizing, or even just interpret results a little differently each time.
Especially if you're doing the same test over and over.
Exactly. Automated tests, on the other hand, they follow the instructions to the letter every single time. No deviation no matter what. So you get much more reliable, consistent results.
And I'm guessing they never get tired or bored.
Nope, they just keep going. And that's where automation really shines, especially with those repetitive tasks like regression testing. You know, making sure that a new piece of code hasn't broken something that was working perfectly fine before. Doing that manually would be a total time suck.
Yeah, it would take forever. So basically, we've covered what test automation is and how it works. But what are the real benefits here?
Okay, so let's dive into the advantages. The first one that comes to mind is speed and efficiency. Automated tests can blow through tests way faster than a human ever could, especially with those repetitive tests we talked about.
Like regression testing, right?
You got it. Plus, they can run 24/7, like overnight while everyone's sleeping, or even simultaneously on different systems, so you can really cut down on that testing time. Imagine getting results back in hours instead of days.
That's huge. What else is there?
So next up is accuracy.
Yeah.
We've already touched on this a bit, but it's worth emphasizing. As humans, we make mistakes, right? It's just part of who we are.
Nobody's perfect.
Exactly. But automated tests, when they're done right, they completely eliminate those human errors. They follow the steps perfectly every time.
No matter what.
Exactly. And that gives you a much higher level of confidence in the quality of your software. In fact, sometimes automated tests can even find those super subtle bugs, the edge cases, that a human tester might miss completely, either because they're pressed for time or just plain tired.
So you're saying that more thorough, too?
In a lot of ways, yes.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the financial side of things. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, everyone cares about the bottom line. So does automation actually save you money?
That's the million-dollar question.
And the answer is a resounding yes. So we've talked about cost effectiveness. And while there is usually an initial investment involved, getting the tools, training your team, and setting up the whole automation framework, you'll see significant savings over time.
So it's like an investment.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Finding and fixing a bug during the development phase is way cheaper than fixing it after the software is already out in the wild.
When it could potentially affect a lot more users.
Precisely. And there's been research to back this up, showing a solid return on investment for companies that implement test automation effectively.
So it pays for itself. What else?
All right, so another big one is reusability. Once you've built a solid test script, you can often use it again and again. Like you can use it in different testing environments and even adapt it for different platforms.
So you don't have to start from scratch every single time.
You got it. That reusability is a huge efficiency boost, especially for those really big, complex projects that need to work seamlessly across multiple systems and browsers.
Makes sense. And one last thing that keeps popping up is this whole CI/CD thing.
Ah, yes. Continuous integration and continuous delivery, or CI/CD.
Can you unpack that one for me?
Sure, it's basically a modern way of developing software.
So what's the gist?
It's all about integrating code frequently and releasing updates faster, and test automation plays a big role in that. Well, imagine every time a developer changes some code, automated tests are automatically triggered. That gives them immediate feedback on whether they've accidentally broken anything.
So it's like a safety net built right in.
Exactly. That instant feedback is essential for keeping the code quality high and pushing out new features and bug fixes faster. Automation acts as a quality gatekeeper throughout the entire development process.
I can definitely see how that would be incredibly valuable. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the great things about automation, but there have to be some downsides, right? What are some of the challenges people might face?
You're right to be a bit skeptical. Nothing is perfect, and test automation definitely has its challenges.
So what's the catch?
Well, one of the biggest ones is maintenance. Software changes all the time.
Yeah, there are always updates and new features.
Right, and when that happens, you often have to update those automated test scripts too, so they can still interact with the application properly.
Because if they don't, then the results aren't going to be accurate.
You got it. And if you let those scripts get outdated, your automated tests can actually do more harm than good.
So it's not just a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Unfortunately not.
Yeah.
You need to dedicate time and resources to keeping everything up to date. Now, another challenge is the initial setup cost. We touched on this earlier, but getting the right tools, training your team, and setting up that whole framework can be a pretty big investment up front, both in terms of time and money.
Especially for smaller companies or teams just starting out.
Definitely. That upfront cost can be a barrier for some.
Yeah.
And there's one more big thing to keep in mind.
What's that?
Complexity. Not every type of testing is a good fit for automation. It's really best for those repetitive tasks where you have very clear steps and expected outcomes. But there's some types of testing that just need that human touch, that intuition and judgment. Things like exploratory testing, usability testing, where you're really trying to get a feel for the user experience.
So you can't automate everything.
Nope. You need to be strategic and figure out which types of testing will benefit the most from automation.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's say someone is convinced about automation and they want to give it a try. What are some of the most popular tools out there?
Well, there are a ton of options, and the best tool for you will depend on a few things, like what type of application you're testing, web, mobile, API, and the skills of your team, your budget, things like that.
So no one-size-fits-all solution.
Not really.
Huh?
But there are some big players that are worth knowing about.
Yeah.
If you're testing web applications, Selenium is a really popular choice.
I've definitely heard that name before.
It's an open source framework that's super flexible. It supports pretty much all the major web browsers and a whole bunch of programming languages.
Like Java, Python, and C#.
Right, you got it.
Yeah.
Selenium's WebDriver architecture allows it to directly interact with the browser, which is a really powerful feature.
So Selenium for web. What about when you're testing on phones and tablets?
For testing mobile apps, and we're talking native apps, hybrid apps, even mobile web apps across both Android and iOS, Appium is a top contender.
Appium. Got it.
It's also open source. And a big plus is that you can write your tests in multiple programming languages, so your team can use what they're already familiar with. Appium essentially leverages the automation frameworks that are already built into Android and iOS to interact with those apps.
So you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Exactly. Now, if you're testing at a more code level, like for unit testing and integration testing, especially in Java environments, JUnit and TestNG are the go-to frameworks.
So these are more for developers then?
Yeah, they let developers write and run tests on individual pieces of their code to make sure they work correctly, both on their own and when they're all put together. They also integrate really well with other testing tools and CI/CD pipelines.
So they fit right into that whole automated workflow we were talking about earlier. Now, what about some of the newer tools out there? What's gaining traction these days?
Oh, there's always something new on the horizon. Cypress is one that's been making waves recently. It's specifically designed for testing those modern web applications built with frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue.
So cutting-edge stuff. What's special about Cypress?
Well, people love it for its speed and reliability. It's also really easy to use, and it lets you see how your tests are interacting with the browser in real time, which makes writing and debugging a whole lot easier.
I can see how that would be a huge time saver. Okay, last but not least, what about testing how different parts of an application talk to each other, like APIs?
APIs. That's where Postman comes in. It's super popular for API testing.
Postman, okay?
It's got this user-friendly interface where you can manually send API requests and see what comes back, but it also has some really powerful automation features.
So you can automate those API tests too.
Exactly. And since APIs are the backbone of so many applications these days, robust API testing is absolutely critical.
Makes sense. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
So any final thoughts or key takeaways about test automation?
Okay, let's recap. The big takeaway is that test automation is a powerful way to make your software testing more efficient, accurate, and fast.
And less prone to those pesky human errors.
Exactly. It can definitely save you time and money in the long run, and it's a key part of modern software development practices like CI/CD.
But it's not without its challenges.
Right. You need to be prepared to invest in the right tools and training, and you need to be diligent about keeping everything up to date. But if you're strategic about it, the payoff can be huge.
So what's your best advice for someone who's just getting started with automation?
Start small. Don't try to automate everything all at once. Focus on the most important parts of your application first and build from there. And when you're building your test scripts, make sure they're easy to understand and update, and that they can be reused in different situations.
So think long term.
Exactly. And of course, make sure to integrate those automated tests into your CI/CD pipeline so you can get that continuous feedback.
Great advice. Well, thanks for guiding us through this whole world of test automation. I hope you, our listeners, are walking away feeling a lot more confident about what it is, why it matters, and how to do it right.
Happy to help.
And before we go, here's a little food for thought. We've talked about how important test automation is for software, but as our world becomes more and more reliant on complex systems in all sorts of areas, how do you think these principles of automation could be applied to ensure those systems are reliable and safe? It's something to think about. Until next time, happy testing.